There is a blue man who lives in a mountain made of ice. He wears a crown he did not ask for, speaks to penguins he calls by the wrong name, writes fan fiction about characters from a world he has forgotten he used to live in, and spends most of his time trying to kidnap princesses for reasons he himself could not fully explain. If you sat him down and asked, he cackles, he stumbles, he blunders through scheme after scheme with the particular incompetence of someone whose relationship with cause and effect has been fundamentally disrupted. He is, by almost every visible measure, a ridiculous figure, absurd in costume and behavior, cartoonish in his incompetence, laughable in his longing. And yet, somewhere buried inside the story of the Ice King is one of the most genuinely heartbreaking meditations on identity, memory, love, sacrifice, loneliness, and the slow dissolution of the self that the entire medium of animation has ever produced. It is dressed in absurdist comedy. It is delivered in fragments scattered across years of episodes, like pieces of a photograph left in different rooms, hidden under the noise of adventure and silliness, until the show decides it is ready to show you what it has been building toward all along. And when it does show you, when the curtain finally parts and you understand who this person actually is and what has happened to him and how much he has lost and how he has endured regardless of all of it, it lands with the particular weight of something you feel in your body rather than just observe with your eyes. His name, before everything else happened, was Simon Petrikov. And everything he became, every version of him, every layer of tragedy and absurdity and unexpected grace, starts with understanding who Simon was before the crown ever touched his head, before the cold settled into him, before the world ended and he survived it in the worst possible way. Let us start at the very beginning. Let us start with the man in the glasses. Part 1. The man in the glasses. Picture him before any of it happened. Simon Petrikov in his element, somewhere in the mid-20th century, a young man with olive skin and dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on the end of his nose with the casual imprecision of someone who has worn glasses for so long, they have forgotten they are there. He is bent over a table, studying something ancient, maybe a piece of carved stone, maybe a bronze fragment, maybe a piece of fabric that has survived several centuries longer than it was supposed to, with the deep, almost reverent attention of someone who genuinely believes that objects can hold history. Inside them, the way wood holds rings of growth. He is not particularly imposing. He is not dashing in the conventional sense. He is not the kind of person who commands a room. He is, instead, the kind of person who would rather be in a room with the objects in it than with the people. He is the kind of scholar who gets genuinely, disproportionately excited about things that other people consider dry to the point of total inertia, who can talk for 45 minutes about the provenance of a bronze clasp from a culture most people have never heard of, who finds something approaching spiritual resonance in the way certain materials survive time when they were never designed to, who loves history not as an abstract collection of dates and names, but as a living question. What were people like, really, under all of it? What did they want? What did they make and why? He is a specialist in antiquarianism, which is a discipline that focuses not just on the academic study of historical periods, but on the physical artifacts those periods leave behind. Where a historian might read a document and extract its meaning, an antiquarian holds the object itself, the weight and temperature and specific quality of the material, and tries to understand what the object was for in the life of the person who owned it. It is a discipline that requires patience and specificity, and an unusual tolerance for the kind of work that rarely produces dramatic results, that proceeds through small accretions of understanding, rather than sudden breakthroughs, that rewards the same qualities in a person that made Simon who he was: careful, thorough, quietly persistent, willing to sit with not knowing for as long as the object requires. He is also, it must be said, mocked for some of his interests, the newspaper clippings that survive into the 1,000-year future that is Adventure Time's present, give us a specific snapshot of how the established academic world treated him. There is a clipping about his discovery of the Enchiridion, the ancient text of heroes that he found during an expedition to the Hindu Kush mountain range. And the headline reads, in one version of it, with the kind of mild institutional condescension that scholarship reserves for people who take unusual things too seriously: The article describes his discovery in a tone that is politely underwhelmed. Someone, possibly the same journalist, wrote a second headline that more plainly mocked the discovery altogether. Simon persists anyway. He keeps going to the strange places, keeps looking for the strange things, keeps writing up his findings with the careful precision of someone who believes the documentation matters even when the audience is skeptical. He has the specific kind of stubbornness that belongs to people who are not performing their beliefs for approval, but who simply believe them, who have organized their lives around questions they genuinely want answered, and who are not going to stop asking just because the questions make people uncomfortable. He has a fiancée named Betty. He calls her his princess, which is a nickname so fully private in its register that it tells you everything about the nature of their relationship. This is not an affectation performed for public consumption, not an endearment deployed to impress. It is the word they have for each other in the small, specific language that close relationships develop, the vocabulary that only makes sense inside the two of them. Betty, from the fragments we eventually learn about her, is herself an extraordinary person. Brilliant, committed, fascinated by the same strange edges of knowledge that Simon inhabits. Someone who found in him not just a romantic partner, but an intellectual equal and a fellow traveler in the particular oddness of caring deeply about things other people dismiss. We see her mostly in old photographs and desperate temporal fragments, always slightly edged with the weight of what eventually happens to them. But in the time before the crown, she and Simon are simply two people who found each other across the margins of conventional academic life and recognized something in the other that made everything slightly easier to bear. Their life together, had things continued in the direction they were moving, would have been, by the quiet, unheroic measure of actual lived experience, a good one. Not spectacular in any conventional sense. Not the kind of life that gets written into history with easy drama, but warm and full and real. Two people who understood each other, who shared the same kind of curiosity about the world, who called each other by private names, and built the specific architecture of shared life that is the closest most people ever get to not being alone. There would have been expeditions. There would have been late nights with artifacts spread across a table and tea going cold at one elbow. There would have been the accumulated shorthand of a long partnership, the particular ease of having someone who already knows the stories, and so does not need them explained. None of this is incidental. The show is doing something careful here, in the way it constructs Simon's former life not as a fairy tale or an idealization, but as something recognizably, specifically human. It needs you to feel the weight of what is about to be taken from him, which means it needs you to first understand what was actually there. The loss only hurts in proportion to your understanding of the value of what was lost. Adventure Time knows this. It builds Simon's before carefully in scattered details across years of episodes, precisely so that when you finally understand the whole of it, you feel the absence as an absence, as a hole in the world that has the exact shape of what should have been there. Simon buys the crown from a dock worker in northern Scandinavia. He does not know what it is, not exactly, though it has the quality of something significant, old in a way that goes beyond mere age, strange in a way that his years of handling artifacts teach him to pay attention to. It is jeweled and ornate, and unlike anything in his existing catalog of known objects. His professional instincts identify it as important. His personal curiosity does the rest. He pays the dock worker and brings it home, adding it to his collection with the care he gives everything, looking at it thoroughly, handling it with attention, trying to understand what it is. And then one evening, with Betty there beside him, he puts it on his head, just to make her laugh. Just for the simple pleasure of being absurd with the person you love, of turning a serious professional object into a prop in a moment of domestic silliness. He is showing her the weird thing he found. The way you show someone you love the small, strange delights that your particular life delivers to you. He is being himself, entirely himself, in the most ordinary and unguarded way possible. What happens next changes everything, not just for him, for everyone, and for centuries to come. Now, before we go further, drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching this from right now. What time is it? What does the world look like outside your window? I genuinely love knowing where these videos find people. And if this is the kind of slow, deep narrative exploration you want more of in your life, hit subscribe now. It costs you nothing, and it means you will be here the next time we sit down together like this. Part 2. What the crown costs he puts on the crown, and then he is somewhere else. When he comes back to himself, there is no memory of where he went or what happened while he was there. There is only Betty's face and the expression on it. An expression that he has never seen there before, something complicated and frightened, and even now, beginning to pull back from him in some fundamental way. Whatever he said or did in that blacked-out interval, it was enough. It was enough to frighten her. It was enough to start the ending of something they had been building with tremendous care and attention. He never fully understands what he did. The crown does not give him access to his own actions under its influence. He can only reconstruct it from the aftermath. From Betty's face, from the quality of the silence that follows, from the growing sense that something has been ruptured in a way that ordinary apology and ordinary explanation cannot repair. He tries. He tries to understand and to explain and to reassure, but the gap is there now, and the crown makes the gap wider over the following days and weeks as its influence begins to seep into even the intervals when he is not wearing it. He begins to hear voices. He begins to have visions. He begins to change in ways he can see in the mirror and feel in his mind. The first faint blue tinge at the edges of his skin, the slight sharpening of his nose, the creeping sense that the person who shows up in his own thoughts is not entirely the person he has always been. Betty leaves. This is the most enormous thing that happens to Simon Petrikov before the Mushroom War itself. And he records it on tape because recording things is what he knows how to do when the alternative is letting the record disappear. He describes her leaving with the specific, controlled precision of someone who is already training himself to witness his own experience, rather than simply inhabit it, because he knows that the ability to inhabit it is what is currently under threat. He does not catastrophize, he does not perform grief for the camera. He simply states what happened, what it meant, what he is afraid of going forward, with the same quiet care he brings to documenting artifacts. He is treating himself as an artifact now. He is trying to preserve the record before the curator is gone. The recordings are remarkable in what they reveal about Simon's character under pressure. Most people, watching themselves undergo an incomprehensible transformation, driven by a magical object they cannot remove and cannot fully understand, would respond with fear or rage or denial. Simon responds with documentation. He keeps asking questions. He keeps trying to understand the mechanism of what is happening to him. He is, even in extremis, constitutionally a person who believes that understanding things is better than not understanding them, who would rather know the truth about his own deterioration than be comforted by a false version of it. He thinks about Betty constantly. He hopes, in the fragile way that hope persists in people when almost all conditions for it are gone, that he will become sane enough again for her to come back. That is how he frames it to himself. Not that she was wrong to leave, not that the crown is to blame, but that he needs to find a way back to the version of himself that deserved her, so that she can return to a person she recognizes. He is, even in the midst of being systematically destroyed, gentle with the person who abandoned him. He understands why she went. He would have gone too. His body continues to change. The skin deepens to its characteristic blue-gray. Not the blue of bruising or cold, but its own specific hue, the color of something ancient and preserved. The nose extends outward in a way that is unmistakably unusual. The hair and beard grow and turn white, lengthening past any ordinary human growth rate, as if the crown is rewriting the biology itself rather than just the mind. His eyes lose their color and go blank. The specific visual quality of the crown's influence made visible in the most immediate way possible, in the windows of the self. His body temperature drops toward an abnormal low, barely cooler than a standard fever in a healthy person, but cold in a way that marks him as something other than entirely human anymore. He is becoming something other than what he was, physically and mentally, a transformation that is not metaphorical but literal, the material of his body being rewritten by the thing on his head. He keeps surviving. The crown, for all the damage it does to his mind, is also doing the thing it was built to do in its secondary function. It is keeping him alive through conditions that would kill an unprotected human. The voices he hears while wearing it include, alongside the madness, an assurance that the crown's power will protect him. He records this on tape, the strange promise of an artifact that is simultaneously his salvation and his destruction, the Faustian arithmetic of magical preservation. He knows the cost. He pays it anyway, because the alternative is not paying it, and the alternative is dying. He is not even sure he would choose differently, he says at one point, if the choice were fully his. He is not sure survival is what he would choose, if he were fully himself and fully free. But he keeps surviving anyway, because whatever is left of him when the crown has its grip knows how to persist even when the person directing the persistence is only partially present. He writes letters during this period. He writes to Betty, knowing she will not receive them. He writes to whoever might find the tapes and want to understand what happened. And he writes preemptively to Marceline, a child he has not yet encountered, whose existence he can only assume from the logic of the devastated world around him, which is full of people who have been left without what they need and who will require someone to have reached out to them even before knowing them. The letters to Marceline are the most remarkable of all the things Simon produces in this transitional time. They are acts of preemptive love, an attempt to send his still present self forward through time to a future encounter that might happen after his present self is gone. The Mushroom War comes. Nobody knows exactly what caused it in the universe of the show or outside of it. Adventure Time is deliberately elliptical about the specifics. It shows you the aftermath in slow, devastating visual language, the ruined highways and collapsed skylines, and the specific quality of silence that settles over places where enormous numbers of people used to be. The world is devastated. The human civilization that Simon Petrikov spent his professional life studying the relics of produces in its final chapter, the most complete relic of all. An entire ruined world, preserved in its ruin, waiting for the next civilization to grow up in the wreckage. Simon walks through that wreckage, changed but not gone. Persisting, Part 3. The Oldest Tragedy. Before we return to Simon's path through the ruins, there is a story that has to be told about where the crown actually came from. Because understanding what it was built to do and what went catastrophically wrong in the building of it is essential to understanding the full philosophical architecture of what Simon becomes. The crown is not just a magical object. It is an argument about the relationship between love, power, and unintended consequences. And the argument is encoded in its origin, 65 million years before Simon Petrikov was born. The episode called Evergreen takes place in the age of dinosaurs. The planet is populated not just by the creatures we know from the fossil record, but by elemental beings. Personifications of the fundamental forces that Adventure Time has always treated as real physical entities rather than abstract concepts. There are elementals of ice, fire, candy, and slime, 4 beings who have existed in relationship with the planet's essential nature for longer than history has any reliable record of. The ice elemental is named Urgence Evergreen. He looks in a way that the show will eventually make explicitly meaningful, remarkably like the Ice King. Blue skin, elongated nose, white beard of impressive length, the general silhouette of an aged and powerful wizard who is entirely comfortable in his own domain. He is not particularly warm, this Urgence Evergreen. He is capable and decisive and genuinely motivated by the desire to save the world, but he channels these qualities through a personality that treats other people, other beings, as instruments rather than as ends in themselves. He is brilliant in the way that people are sometimes brilliant when that brilliance has been allowed to exist without sufficient accountability. Unquestioned by the people around him, unchallenged in his assumptions about his own centrality, confident in ways that tip past confidence into something more like imperviousness. He has an apprentice, a small theropod dinosaur named Gunther. Gunther is everything Evergreen is not. Small, eager, devoted, in the particular way that people are devoted when they have centered their entire sense of self around the approval of someone who does not fully see them. Evergreen has not been deliberately cruel to Gunther. He has simply never considered Gunther's interior experience as something worthy of particular attention. He gives orders, He criticizes performance. He takes the dinosaur's adoration as a matter of practical efficiency rather than as an expression of genuine relationship. He never says thank you. He never asks what Gunther wants or thinks or feels. He does not, in any meaningful sense, know his apprentice as a person. Gunther is a function. A useful function, but a function. Gunther adores him. This is the specific quality of the attachment, not a healthy admiration for a capable mentor, but the total, organizing devotion of someone who has built their entire identity around the project of becoming someone else. Gunther's deepest wish is not to save the world, or to have adventures, or to be loved in return. Gunther's deepest wish is simply to be like Evergreen, to approximate the standard Evergreen represents, to be the thing Evergreen would be proud of. Everything else comes after this, if it comes at all. A comet is coming. Evergreen identifies it as different from ordinary periodic comets. This one carries something malevolent inside it, a concentrated evil, an intentional destructiveness. Something that is coming as attack rather than natural catastrophe. His fellow elementals disagree. They see the comet as part of the natural rhythm of the planet. Things end, things begin again. The elements persist across cycles of destruction and renewal. This is simply how it is. There is an almost meditative quality to their acceptance. Evergreen finds their acceptance intolerable. He is not a being who makes peace with catastrophe when he believes catastrophe can be prevented. He is the kind of powerful person who believes that if a problem can be solved, it must be solved, and that his capabilities make him uniquely obligated to do the solving. He designs the crown. He works out the mechanism himself, with the specific brilliance of someone who has spent longer than most forms of life have existed working with magical ice. The crown will grant its wearer their deepest wish, not their surface desire, not what they think they want in this specific moment, but the most fundamental, truest expression of what they are. The mechanism will reach past all the layers of the person and grant what it finds at the core. He adds a bonding spell. The mind of the first wearer will be forever imprinted upon the crown. He intends to be that first wearer. His deepest wish is to destroy the comet. The mechanism is perfectly aligned. And then everything goes wrong in the specific, catastrophic way that things go wrong when someone with tremendous capability has not accounted for the variable of the people they overlooked. A lava creature they stole power from comes back to Evergreen's fortress at exactly the wrong moment. The fight is devastating. Evergreen is pinned under collapsed ice out of reach of the crown with the comet minutes from impact. There is only one option. He calls for Gunther. He tells Gunther to put the crown on and wish the comet away. He gives this instruction in his characteristic tone of command, the tone of someone issuing an order to a useful instrument. He does not explain that the mechanism will reach into Gunther's deepest self and grant whatever it finds there. He assumes, because he has never actually known Gunther, because he has never asked Gunther what Gunther actually wants, that what it will find is something aligned with saving the world. What it finds instead is the wish to be like Evergreen. Gunther's skin turns blue. His nose elongates. His hair goes white and grows. His body reshapes itself toward the archetype he has been reaching for his whole life. And in this transformed state, completely beyond the reach of reason, he cannot be redirected. He can only repeat over and over the phrase that Evergreen uses most often in his direction: Gunther, no. It is the instruction that has defined his existence. It is the most consistent communication he has received from the being he adores. And in his madness, still wearing the crown, still transformed, he screams it over and over while Evergreen pleads with him to do something, to use a spell, to stop the comet. Evergreen realizes in this moment that he never taught Gunther any spells. He only ever taught Gunther what to do and what not to do, never the underlying principles. He gave his apprentice orders, not tools. He invested in Gunther's utility, not in Gunther himself. The comet hits. The dinosaurs go extinct. The crown survives. The philosophical weight of this origin cannot be overstated. The bonding spell was designed so that Evergreen's deepest wish would be forever imprinted on the crown's architecture. But Gunther wore it first, and Gunther's deepest wish was to be like Evergreen. So the crown's primary function has been permanently overlaid with the imprint of a dinosaur's longing. The longing of someone who loved a person so completely that they wanted to become them. From this point forward, anyone who wears this crown will undergo a transformation toward the archetype that Gunther's mind encoded: blue skin, elongated nose, white hair, ice powers, and eventually, complete loss of the self that existed before. This is what Simon Petrikov purchased from a Scandinavian dockworker. He bought, without knowing it, the preserved grief of a dinosaur who was never properly seen by the person he loved most. And that grief, carried in an artifact across 65 million years, ate him alive the moment he put it on his head. There is no villain in this origin story. Evergreen's arrogance, his failure to see his own apprentice, his assumption that power and purpose aligned in him perfectly, his blindness to the emotional reality of someone he treated as an instrument, is a very human kind of failure. The compounding accident of the lava creature's return, of the bonding spell's perfect functioning under imperfect circumstances, of Gunther's wish being the exact wrong wish for the exact wrong moment, this is tragedy in the classical sense, where the suffering is not produced by malice but by the combination of character and circumstance. Everything worked exactly as designed. The design was not designed for what actually happened. And 65 million years later, a man who loved old things bought a piece of that tragedy home in a bag. Part 4. Walking into the end of the world. The Mushroom War ends. The world does not. What is left behind is a landscape that the show renders with a specific visual poetry. Ash-gray skies over collapsed infrastructure. Nature beginning the slow process of reclaiming what humans built. The familiar shapes of human civilization becoming unfamiliar through ruin and overgrowth. Highway overpasses draped with silence. Storefronts open to the weather. Cities that were full of 10 million different lives, now containing only the echoes of those lives and the objects they left behind. It is not a landscape of active catastrophe. The worst of it is over in the immediate, violent sense. What remains is the aftermath, which has its own particular quality. The silence of places that used to be full of sound. The emptiness of spaces built to hold people. The persistent presence of objects that outlasted their owners. Simon Petrikov walks through this. He is changed by the crown, changed enough that ordinary survival is not the obstacle it would be for most humans. The cold does not harm him. The physical dangers of the ruined landscape are manageable for someone with his developing ice powers. The crown is keeping his body alive through conditions that should be lethal. But he is not yet fully the Ice King. He is in the space between, still capable of recording his own experience, still capable of articulating what is happening to him, still sometimes clear enough to understand, and still sometimes lost enough that clarity is only a rumor. He keeps making recordings, not every day, not with the regularity of someone who has a stable schedule, but whenever he has access to his faculties in sufficient measure to articulate what they contain. The VHS tapes represent a kind of distributed autobiography, scattered through time in the same way that the person making them is being scattered through his own mind. Some recordings are clear and composed. Some are confused. Some are clearly made from a state in which the crown's influence is very close to the surface, where you can hear the edges of it in the way his voice changes, in the quality of attention he brings to what he is saying. He describes the crown's voices. He describes how they told him the crown's power would save him, and he believes this to be true in a factual sense, even while recognizing its kayo. He knows he is being saved by the thing that is destroying him. He articulates this with the specific, clear-eyed precision that makes him remarkable. He is not in denial about the trade he is making. He is not telling himself the story in a way that makes it feel better than it is. He just keeps going, paying the toll each time because the alternative is dying in a ruined world alone, and something in him, Simon the antiquarian, Simon the careful documenter, Simon who called Betty his princess, does not want to die in a ruined world alone. He writes letters. He writes more than what we eventually see in the show, presumably. He writes during the intervals when he is clear enough to write, documenting himself the way he documented the artifacts he studied. Some of these letters are addressed to Betty, knowing she will not receive them. Some are addressed to whoever might find the tapes, and some, written in careful, deliberate language using whatever materials he can find, old newspapers assembled like ransom notes, are addressed to Marceline. To a child he has not yet met. This is one of the most extraordinary things Simon Petrikov does. He writes to Marceline before he knows her. He writes to her because the logic of the situation requires her to exist. The ruins are full of surviving children, of people who lost everything and are wandering the wreckage. And whatever is left of Simon's ability to think clearly has recognized that the right thing to do is reach out to them, preemptively, before he is no longer able to reach out at all. He writes to a future encounter from a present self that he knows is running out. He writes what he needs to say while he can still say it, and folds it into letters that might find someone who needs them. In those letters he says, "I can feel myself slipping." He says, "I am still here for now, but I am frightened of the versions of me that show up when the crown is on, and I am frightened of what those versions might do to people who trust me." He says, "Forgive me for what I do when I no longer know you." He says, "Please know that whatever I am at those moments, there is something underneath it that loves you, and that thing underneath will always be there even when I cannot reach it myself." These letters are eventually set to music. By Marceline, 1,000 years after they were written, in an episode that will absolutely destroy you if you let it. Part 5. Simon and Marcy, a love story in the ruins. She is 7 years old. She is half human, half demon, which means she will eventually live for millennia if she is not killed first. But right now she is just 7 and the world has ended, and she is alone in a city that is not a city anymore, surrounded by the wreckage of a civilization that ended before she was old enough to understand what civilizations are for. Simon finds her. The timing is accidental in the immediate sense and probably inevitable in the larger sense. The ruins are full of surviving children who need someone, and Simon is a surviving adult who needs someone. And they find each other the way these things happen in devastated places, by proximity and necessity and the specific human instinct to orient toward other people in the dark. He gives her a stuffed bear from a toy shop that has been opened to the sky. The bear's name is Hambo. He names it on the spot, or she names it, or they settle on it together in the way that things get named between people who are just beginning the project of knowing each other. Hambo becomes the most precious object Marceline owns for the next 1,000 years. She carries it through centuries of immortal life, through all the relationships and losses and changes that make up her extremely long story, and she keeps it long past the point of reasonable keeping because it is not just a toy. It is the weight of everything Simon put into giving it, which is the weight of everything he had left to give, which was enormous. The episode called Simon and Marcy shows us one specific stretch of their time together, set 996 years before the events of the main Adventure Time series. It follows a day in which Simon tries to find chicken soup for a sick Marceline in the ruins of a destroyed city, and it is both deeply silly and genuinely one of the most emotionally devastating things the show produces. The show's creative team described this episode when pitching it to Cartoon Network as The Road Except for Kids, a reference to Cormac McCarthy's novel about a father and son surviving in the aftermath of an unnamed catastrophe, moving through a devastated landscape with only each other as anchors against the darkness of everything else. The comparison holds. Simon and young Marceline are wandering the outskirts of a bombed-out city. The world is full of mutated creatures, oozing, shambling things that were once ordinary animals or humans, and have been transformed by whatever forces the Mushroom War unleashed into the environment. It is genuinely bleak, the show's post-apocalyptic palette doing exactly what it does best. Finding beauty and horror in the specific visual quality of things that have been destroyed but not erased, of worlds that ended but left their shapes behind. Simon is already changed enough that he needs to be careful with himself. The crown is always accessible, always offering its terrible help whenever the situation becomes dangerous enough to seem to require it. Marceline has made him promise not to put it on. She is 7 years old and she has already seen what the crown does to him when he wears it, has seen the person she trusts most become something unrecognizable. And she has responded the way children respond to frightening things they cannot control, by trying to manage them through rules. Do not wear the crown, Simon. Promise me. He promises. And then Marceline gets sick, and there are mutated slime creatures converging on them in an alleyway, and the promise becomes impossible to keep. Simon sings to hold himself together while the crown is on. He sings the theme from Cheers, that specific, gentle mid-1980s American sitcom about a bar where everybody knows your name. As a kind of anchor, a rope thrown from his former self to his present self across the ocean of the crown's interference. He sings it over and over while the ice magic pours out of him and the creatures go down, trying to stay Simon a little longer by holding on to something that was unambiguously Simon's. The song is not dramatic or grand. It is specifically mundane, a television theme song from a comfortable sitcom about a neighborhood bar, warmth and familiarity concentrated into a few bars of melody. He is using it the way you might use a remembered smell or a specific piece of music to locate yourself in time, to hold the thread back to who you were before everything changed. It does not fully work. When he takes the crown off this time, most of the effects do not reverse. His beard is the only thing that shrinks back. The rest stays. Something has crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. Later, when Marceline drinks the soup that arrives improbably from a mysterious pink substance clinging to a nearby building, a piece of what will eventually become Princess Bubblegum in one of the show's extraordinarily patient pieces of cosmological connective tissue, she tells him she loves him. He says he loves her too, and calls her Gunter. Just once. Just the one slip. She looks at him. He comes back. He does not know what he just said or why, and they continue because the only direction available is forward. This moment is the hinge of everything in the Simon-Marceline relationship. It is the moment where you understand that the end is already underway, that the slow dissolution has reached the place where it can touch even his most intimate connections, that the person who called Betty his princess and found a small child in the ruins and tried with everything he had to keep her safe is getting further away. He is still there. But not for much longer. At some point in the period following this episode, Simon leaves Marceline. This is one of the most important and most painful decisions in the entire story. He leaves not because he has stopped loving her. He leaves precisely because he loves her, and because the version of himself that is coming will not know her and may hurt her. And he has decided that her safety is more important than his own need to not be alone. He writes her a final letter using old newspapers, assembled with the patient care of someone who needs every word to land, and he explains the magic is keeping him alive but also making him a danger. He cannot guarantee what he will do when he fully loses himself. He is sorry for anything he might do when he no longer knows her. He leaves. She does not forgive him for it for a long time. What she eventually comes to is something more complicated than forgiveness. A kind of sustained presence with both truths simultaneously, the truth that he left and the truth of why he left, and the truth that the love was always there underneath everything that the crown changed. She carries it forward. She carries him forward in the stuffed bear and the letters and the specific quality of care she learned from him in a ruined world. The child he protected grew into 1,000 years of living, and all of it was built partly on the foundation he laid before he had to go. Part 6. The King Without the Key to Himself. Adventure Time's main story begins 1,000 years after Simon Petrikov walked away from the child he found in the ruins. In that time, the planet has transformed itself into the land of Oo, a geography rebuilt by the combined forces of magical mutation and the extraordinary proliferation of life that fills any available ecological niche when the previous occupants leave enough space. It is a world that grew in the vacuum that Apocalypse created, full of things that are strange and wonderful and dangerous in equal measure, organized around entirely different principles than the world that came before it. Somewhere in the colder regions, in a castle built of ice inside a mountain built of ice, the Ice King rules. He is over 1,000 years old, though he does not fully know this because he does not fully know how time works in relation to himself. He is blue and bearded and pointy-nosed, costumed in the specific, dignified, grotesque way of a wizard who has been wearing the same robes for centuries. He has penguins. He has ice powers. He has a compulsion toward kidnapping princesses that he cannot fully explain, even when pressed, though he has developed elaborate theories about it that mostly amount to wanting someone to be with him. He is, by the metrics the Land of Oo uses to assess such things, a villain. Not a great villain, not a powerful one in the strategic sense. He does not pose existential threats or have coherent ideologies. He is a villain in the way that certain natural disasters are villains. Not through deliberate malice, but through the damage he causes while doing the thing he does. He kidnaps princesses and must be stopped, consistently and repeatedly by Finn and Jake. He schemes and fails. He makes bad decisions continuously. He is, in the show's early seasons, a comedic antagonist, threatening enough to provide conflict, incompetent enough to be consistently thwarted, absurd enough that most of his scenes have the texture of farce rather than genuine menace. But even in the early seasons, before any of the backstory has been revealed, there are things about the Ice King that do not quite fit the cartoon villain mold. He does not take pleasure in cruelty. He does not have a plan for world domination or an ideology of power, or the specific gleam of someone who enjoys causing suffering. He is not hurting people because he wants to. He is hurting them because he cannot see, through the distortion of what the crown has done to his capacity for social reasoning, the difference between what he is doing and what he wants. He wants companionship. He wants someone to choose to be with him. He wants to be known by someone who stays because they want to stay, not because they have been captured and cannot leave. And the only shape his wanting can take is acquisition. Bring the princess to the castle, and from this proximity, somehow the connection he is trying to have will emerge. This makes him philosophically interesting in a way that purely malicious villains are not, because he demonstrates with uncomfortable clarity the way genuine need can distort into genuine harm when the person carrying the need has lost access to the tools for meeting it appropriately. The Ice King is a portrait of loneliness taken to its logical, terrible extreme. The place where need, when it cannot be met through normal channels, starts finding abnormal ones and justifying them to itself. He is not the worst case. He is the case that happens all the time in attenuated forms. The need that distorts into control because the person carrying it has no better mechanism for getting what they need. He has a relationship with his penguins that is, in its way, touching. He cares about them. He knows the name he uses for all of them. Gunter, always Gunter, the name the crown stamps on every relationship it allows him, and he uses it with a consistency that reads as genuine, as if calling them by this particular wrong name is itself a form of recognition. When his kingdom is threatened, his first thought in certain moments is for the penguin's safety, a small and specific warmth in a character who mostly reads as cold in every sense. The penguins are there. They persist. And this substitutes, in the Ice King's fractured understanding of what connection feels like, for the thing he is actually reaching for. He plays the drums. He writes fan fiction. The fan fiction is about gender-swapped versions of the characters in his world, Fiona and Cake, who are Finn and Jake reimagined. And he writes it with the absorbed focus of someone creating a world that is slightly better, slightly more comfortable than the one he actually inhabits. He does not know, while writing them, that Fiona and Cake are real. He does not know that Prismo, the cosmic wish granter, created their universe as a private project and hid it inside his mind. He just knows that he loves them, these fictional characters, with a warmth and specificity that he cannot quite manage to direct toward actual people. In his locked room, there are photographs. Betty's scarf. Objects from a life he does not know he lived. He does not know why he keeps them. He just does, with the unconscious fidelity of something in him that refuses to discard what it cannot name. Part 7. I Remember You. Marceline, the vampire queen, is over 1,000 years old. She was there, she was in the ruins with Simon before he was fully gone. She received the stuffed bear and the letters and the provisional, desperate love of a man who knew he was losing himself. She has been carrying the full weight of that knowledge for centuries, folded into the ordinary management of her extraordinarily long life, alongside everything else that makes her who she is across the millennia. The Ice King shows up at her house one afternoon and wants to write a song with her. This is the setup of the episode called I Remember You from Adventure Time's 4th season, which is by the assessment of many people who care about animation and storytelling, one of the finest 22 minutes the show ever produced. The episode works because of what it does not explain. It trusts you to feel the weight of what is happening without being told explicitly what that weight consists of. The Ice King has brought materials. He found somewhere in the clutter of his castle old notes and clippings and pieces of paper that he thinks might make good song lyrics. He does not know what they are. He cannot identify them as his own history, cannot connect them to the person he was before the crown, cannot read the handwriting on the notes as his own handwriting. He carries them into Marceline's apartment with the cheerful cluelessness of someone delivering props for a scene he does not understand he is already in. Marceline knows exactly what they are. She has known for 1,000 years what they are. She has to stand there and receive this. The man who protected her, the man whose letters she has carried across centuries, the man who sang the Cheers theme in an alleyway to stay himself a little longer, before calling her Gunter by mistake, delivering his own history to her as raw material for a creative project. The specific weight of this moment is what makes the episode extraordinary. She is the only one who knows what is happening. She is the last living person who holds Simon Petrikov in her memory as a complete and specific human being. She is the keeper of him, the way a museum is the keeper of an artifact, not as an owner, not as someone who can make the thing be what it was, but as someone who understands its significance and maintains it with care. She turns his letters into music. She takes the words he wrote to her across the gap of his own deterioration. The explanations, the apologies, the careful documentation of his own disappearance, and she makes them into a song. The episode is organized around this process, this painful and exquisite act of translation, with Marceline sitting at her instruments and the Ice King sitting nearby listening to a song that is literally about him, that consists of words he wrote about himself, that tells the story he is the central character of, and not knowing any of it. He listens with mild, pleasant attention. The story of Simon and the crown and Marceline and the mushroom war passes through his awareness like weather passing through a room, present briefly, then gone, leaving no particular impression on the surfaces it moved through. He processes it as a sad story about someone else. He does not recognize the Simon in the lyrics as himself. He does not make the connection between the letters and his own handwriting, between the photographs and his own face before the crown. He is looking at his own history from the outside and does not know that is what he is doing. There is a moment toward the end of the episode where Marceline's composure breaks. She has been managing this all along. The rage and the grief and the specific complicated love of someone mourning a person who is still technically in the room. And she cannot manage it anymore. "You don't remember anything, do you, Simon?" she says. It is not quite a question. He looks at her with the polite, slightly confused expression of someone who has heard his name and is not sure what the context is. He does not know that the name is his. The episode ends with a flashback. Young Marceline, 7 years old, in the gray and quiet ruins of the world. Simon moving toward her through the rubble with the careful, uncertain tenderness of someone who is not yet sure how to do this, but who is absolutely going to. The blue is already in his skin. The beard is already long. He is already partway gone, already on his way to becoming the Ice King. But he is still moving toward her. He is still choosing, with whatever is left of him, to reach. The song is called Remember You. Its title is the most precise thing about it. He wrote I remember you in the original letters, meaning he was speaking to the Marceline he hoped would remember who he had been, trying to make sure she held on to Simon when he could not hold on to himself. She, 1,000 years later, performs his words back at him as an act of witness. I remember you means entirely different things to each of them. For Simon, it was a plea. For Marceline, it is testimony. The Ice King, listening to both without knowing either, nods along to the melody, perhaps feeling something, perhaps not, somewhere beyond the reach of any translation. This is what loss looks like when it does not have the courtesy to fully leave. This is what loving someone across the discontinuity of who they used to be and who they have become looks like. Adventure Time does not make this easy or clean or resolvable. It just shows it in all its difficulty and asks you to hold it. Part 8. The Woman Who Came Back Through Time. Betty Groff enters the main narrative of Adventure Time in Season 5. Her arrival is precipitated by a temporary restoration of Simon. An anti-magic entity strips the crown's influence away, and in that deflation of magical interference, Simon is briefly entirely himself. He has his memories. He has his mind. He has all of it for the first time in 1,000 years. He is also dying. Without the crown's magic sustaining his biology, his body is reverting to its actual condition, which is the condition of a man who should have died centuries ago. He is not compatible with continued existence in his restored state. What he wants, in this brief window, is to apologize to Betty. Not to be restored, not to survive, just to say sorry. To let her know that whatever the crown made him do and say, it was not what he would have chosen. He asks Marceline for Hambo, the stuffed bear, to power a portal to the past. Marceline gives it to him. She gives up the most irreplaceable thing she owns to help the man she lost send an apology to the woman whose leaving started all of this. This is, quietly, one of the most remarkable acts of love in the entire show. The portal opens at the exact moment in Betty's past when Simon had just put on the crown for the first time. She looks up and sees a future version of him, old and bearded and dying, appearing in her living room with the specific quality of someone who has crossed an enormous distance to deliver a very simple message. He explains the situation. He says he is sorry. Betty does not receive the apology as an ending. She receives it as the beginning of a new problem. She jumps through the portal. She comes to the future. She figures out how to keep him alive. She succeeds. The crown comes back. Simon is gone. The Ice King is back, looking at Betty with polite incomprehension. Betty stays. She stays 1,000 years from her own time, separated from everything she knew because the man she loves is here in some form, and she has committed herself to fixing that form. She becomes a student of magic. She works, she sacrifices, she accumulates power and pays costs for that power and keeps working. And the further she goes down this path, the more she loses herself in it, because the project of restoring Simon has become so fully her organizing purpose that there is increasingly no Betty outside of it. She says at one point, with the flat honesty of someone who has been in this long enough to see it clearly, I spent so much time dedicated to Simon, I'm not sure there's even any me left anymore. This is the show's most important statement about Betty, and one of its most important statements about the nature of devotion when it goes wrong. She loves Simon. The love is real. It is the realest thing in her. But love organized entirely around the project of changing another person back into who they were, without sufficient space for the lover's own personhood, without the recognition that the love itself requires two people to remain themselves, becomes something that consumes rather than connects. Betty's dedication is an act of love and an act of self-erasure simultaneously. The show is clear-eyed about both dimensions without reducing one to the other. She is not a simple martyr. She is a person whose love became her only orientation point, and who lost herself when that orientation point kept receding from her reach. In the finale, Come Along With Me, Betty summons the cosmic entity GOLB in a final attempt to cure Simon. GOLB is entropy made visible, pure dissolution, the force that unmakes everything it touches back to something prior to structure. Ice King and Finn and Betty are all swallowed by GOLB together, and inside the creature they are reduced to their most essential forms. The Ice King becomes Simon, the bow tie and elbow patches and dark eyes restored, Golb's dissolving power stripping away everything that had been added and leaving only what had always been most deeply there. Betty uses the crown's restored wish-granting state. She wishes to protect Simon. The crown grants it. It fuses her with Golb and transforms both into Golbetty, a new entity that is neither fully one nor the other. She pushes Simon and Finn out. She stays behind. The new entity departs. Simon stands in the wreckage and calls her name. She is gone. He is free. These two facts are simultaneous and inseparable. The one cannot exist without the other. The relationship between Simon and Betty has been described with precision as a love story of uneven sacrifice, obsession, and loss. Each gave up enormous things. The distribution was never equal. Betty gave everything. Simon was given back his mind, and he got to keep it, and the cost was paid entirely by someone else. The show knows this and wants you to know it too, not to condemn Simon or diminish Betty's love, but because the truth of a love story includes the truths that are not comfortable. Part 9. The Ship and the Self is the Ice King. Simon Petrikov? This is the philosophical center of the character, and Adventure Time has the intellectual honesty to not give it a clean answer. It poses the question seriously, holds it open across years of storytelling, and lets it do its philosophical work rather than domesticating it into a moral lesson. The ship of Theseus is one of the oldest paradoxes in philosophy. If you have a ship and you replace it part by part until nothing of the original material remains, is it still the same ship? Philosophers have disagreed about this for millennia, which tells you something important. It is not the kind of question that has an answer that everyone can agree to, because the answer is nested inside deeper disagreements about what identity actually is. Is identity constituted by material continuity, structural continuity, functional continuity, historical continuity, the continuity of memory, the continuity of relationships, something else entirely? Simon Petrikov and the Ice King share a body. They share a biological history. They share a name in the sense that the name Simon still appears in old recordings and in Marceline's memory of the person she knew. What they do not share in any straightforward sense is consciousness. The Ice King does not know he is Simon. He does not remember being Simon. He watches a recording of Simon speaking and feels mild embarrassment at the idea that someone once wore glasses, as if he is watching a documentary about a stranger rather than a home movie of himself. He is not performing this ignorance. He genuinely cannot find the person who was there before. The Alzheimer's metaphor is the one that critics and the show's creative team have acknowledged explicitly, and it is accurate and important. What the crown does to Simon is similar in functional description to what severe dementia does to a person. It erodes memory, dissolves narrative coherence, leaves behind a present-tense creature who has lost access to the past that made them who they were. People who have watched loved ones undergo this kind of cognitive deterioration describe the particular grief of presence without accessibility, the person still being physically there while being unreachable in the ways that matter most. This is Marceline's situation for most of 1,000 years. But the Ice King has not simply depleted Simon. He has not just had things removed. Something new grew in the space the crown created in Simon's mind, using the available materials, the loneliness, the desire for connection, the intellectual curiosity, the fundamental warmth that survives in distorted shapes, to build its own personality. The Ice King has genuine preferences, genuine pleasures, genuine relationships. He is not merely traumatized, he is differently organized in a way that cannot be cleanly separated back into components. One useful framing: Simon and the Crown's corruption did not produce Ice King through simple addition of damage. They produced something through transformation, a process in which two systems became so thoroughly interpenetrated that a new third thing emerged. The Ice King is Simon's longing transmuted into obsession. He is Simon's intelligence expressed through erratic schemes. He is Simon's capacity for love manifested as attachment to penguins and fictional characters, and the buried ghost of a woman he no longer consciously knows he misses. He is a continuation of Simon rather than a replacement, but a continuation that has taken a shape Simon would not recognize. The show also resists the clean moral framing that would make one version definitively the real one. The Ice King has a life. He has made a place for himself in Ooh. He has relationships and genuine presence in the world. Betty's insistence on restoring him is, from one angle, an act of love. From another angle, it is a refusal to accept who he actually is now, a determination to overwrite the present with the past. The show does not adjudicate this cleanly. Both things are true. They are in conflict because they are both oriented toward the same person, but require incompatible things from him. There is also the question of guilt. Simon cannot have consented to the actions the Ice King took. He was not the decision maker. But the actions were done in his name and in his body, and the world experienced the Ice King as a real presence with real effects on real people. Simon, restored, must live with this history without having made it, which is a particular kind of responsibility that does not fit neatly into ordinary categories of culpability. The show does not resolve this with a moral declaration. It says, this is the situation he is in, and he has to find a way to live in it. The crown itself is doing something closer to grooming than mere transformation. It communicates with its wearers, makes itself necessary, makes its continued use feel justified, makes the cost of removing it seem higher than the cost of continuing to wear it. This is structurally similar to addiction, the substance simultaneously providing something real and destroying the person providing it. The crown keeps Simon alive and keeps Simon gone. He needs it to survive. It ensures that the person who survives is not quite him. Part 10. Free and Falling. 12 years after the events of the Adventure Time finale in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, Simon Petrikov lives in an apartment in the land of Oo and watches Cheers on television and is quietly, consistently, completely miserable. He is free. He has been free for over a decade. The crown is gone. Its influence is dissolved. His mind is his own again. He is, in any clinical or functional sense, healed. And he cannot cope with being the healed version of himself in this place and time. The spin-off handles this with a quietness that earns its weight precisely because it does not overclaim it. Simon in the spin-off is not dramatic about his suffering. He is not visibly falling apart in ways that would make his condition easy to categorize and address. He is just a person who wakes up every morning and watches a television show from before the apocalypse and goes to his job as the curator of a small exhibition about pre-mushroom war human life and feels, with increasing certainty, that something essential is absent from his present that he cannot retrieve. He is a temporal fish out of water. This phrase appears in the show's own description of his situation, and it is precise. He is a person whose entire cultural formation happened in the 20th century, who has woken up in something functionally resembling the 31st, surrounded by people whose context for existence is incomprehensible to him, in ways that go beyond mere unfamiliarity. They do not share his references, his assumptions, his intuitions. He cannot navigate this world the way someone who grew up in it can, and there is no learning curve that closes this particular gap, because the gap is not informational. It is existential. He is also the last of his kind, the last human survivor of the Mushroom War, the last person alive for whom the 20th century is not history, but lived experience, for whom Cheers is a comfort rather than a curiosity, for whom chicken soup in a restaurant is a memory rather than a recreation. He carries a world inside him that no one else in the land of Oo can verify, and this isolation, being the sole witness to a world that is gone, compounds everything else. He tells Finn in one of the spin-off's most candid moments that he sometimes misses being the Ice King. He says this because the Ice King was too crazy to understand how alone he was. The crown's madness was an accidental anesthetic. It prevented him from feeling the full weight of his own situation by preventing him from understanding it clearly enough to feel it. Now he understands it. Now he feels all of it. The 1,000 years, the lost people, Betty's sacrifice, the harm done as the Ice King, the fact that he is standing in a world of magic and wonder and incomprehensible strangeness with no existing relationship to the ordinary human existence he came from. He tries to call Marceline. She is finally happy. She is with Princess Bubblegum in a good place after centuries of difficulty. And Simon hears her laughing through the phone and decides not to burden her. He pretends everything is fine. They make vague plans to hang out. He ends the call and goes back to his apartment and opens the Fiona and Cake fanfiction book he wrote as the Ice King and stares at it. He sets up a ritual to summon Betty, or Goal Betty, what Betty became. It goes wrong. Instead of reaching her, he accidentally opens a portal that brings Fiona and Cake from their universe into his. And the events of the spin-off begin. The spin-off takes Simon through a journey that is, on a deeper level, a journey through himself. He has to face what his relationship with Betty actually was in terms harder than the version of the story he has been telling himself. In one of the spin-off's most formally inventive sequences, Betty gives him access to his own story as a choose-your-own-adventure book, and he watches himself make choices at every decision point and realizes, with the cold clarity of recognition that has been waiting for the right moment, that he always chose Simon's path, never Betty's. At every point where one path was better for him and another was better for her, he chose himself, not with conscious cruelty, but consistently. The book does not lie. He reaches the moment where he is ready to sacrifice himself, to put the crown back on, to become the Ice King again, to trade his recovered sanity for Fiona and Cake's survival. Betty stops him. She tells him she does not regret what she did. She tells him his life has value. She tells him to go home. Whether Simon believes this is something the show leaves honestly ambiguous. He goes home, he accepts, or begins the process of accepting, which is different from accepting, the life he has been given back. The show does not promise that this process will resolve neatly. It just says, he is still here and he is still Simon, and that is enough for now. Part 11. What the Cold Teaches. There is a way in which the entire philosophical weight of Simon Petrikov and the Ice King can be reduced to a single question. What does it mean to persist? Not to triumph, not to recover, not to overcome in the Hollywood sense where suffering produces growth and growth produces resolution, and the person who emerges is stronger and wiser and better for what happened to them. Just to persist. To keep going through conditions you were not designed for, using tools that were made for a world that no longer exists, in a direction that is not entirely clear toward an outcome that has not been guaranteed. Simon persists through the crown. He persists through the apocalypse. He persists through losing Betty, through losing Marceline, through losing his own mind and his own memory and his own ability to know himself. He persists as the Ice King for 1,000 years. He persists back to himself when the crown comes off. He persists through the depression and the disorientation and the specific crushing weight of being the last person who remembers the old world. He keeps going, and the question the show keeps asking is, what does the keeping going preserve? What is being maintained in the act of persistence? What is the value of continuing when you are not quite sure what you are continuing for? What the show keeps finding in the ruins of Simon across all his transformations is the capacity for love. Not romantic love specifically, though that is part of it. The broader, more fundamental capacity for care, for finding specific other people worthy of one's attention and protection and sacrifice and grief. This capacity is what Simon had before the crown. It is what the crown could never fully erase. It is what the Ice King expresses in the only shapes available to him. The obsessive princess seeking that is the distorted echo of reaching for Betty, the genuine affection for his penguins, the fan fiction written about characters who are in some deep way the children he never had, the locked room full of photographs he cannot explain keeping. The reaching continues even when the person doing the reaching does not know what they are reaching for. This is what the show keeps showing us. The Ice King does not know his obsession with princesses is an echo of calling Betty his princess. He does not know that Gunter is a name that comes from the deepest architecture of the crown itself, from a dinosaur's love for a master who never fully saw him. He does not know that the photographs in his locked room are of the woman he loved 1,000 years ago. But something in him, the persistence, the continuation, the thing that was Simon before it was Ice King, keeps reaching toward all of these things as if they still matter, because they do still matter, because love is apparently more durable than the memory of what it was for. This is what the show is saying about love. It is more durable than memory. Whatever self-continuity means, in the case of Simon and Ice King, whatever Ship of Theseus answer you apply to the question of whether they are the same person, the love persists across the break. Some version of what Simon felt for Betty has survived 1,000 years of madness in the only shapes it could find. Still reaching, still trying, even when the hand doing the reaching belongs to a creature who does not know what it is reaching for. Consider also what the show says about the relationship between power and personhood. The Ice King is enormously powerful. His magical capabilities are genuine and substantial. He rules a kingdom. He has abilities that most beings in Ooh would envy. Simon, without the crown, is entirely ordinary. No powers, no magic. The crown gave him an enormous amount of power and took away an enormous amount of personhood. And these are not equivalent quantities, even though one of them looks larger from outside. The things Simon makes with his ordinary human capacity for connection outlast everything the crown gives the Ice King. Hambo outlasts the Ice Crown. Marceline's love outlasts the Ice Kingdom. Betty's sacrifice outlasts 1,000 years of the Ice King's existence. The letters Simon wrote before the madness found Marceline across a millennium. The recordings reached Finn and Jake, who became kinder to the Ice King because of them. The specific, irreplaceable texture of Simon Petrikov's personhood survived in the impressions it left on other people, carried by them through time in the way that memory carries what it loved. The show is also saying something about grief, specifically about the particular grief of watching someone you love become unreachable. Marceline is the witness to this, the one who bears its full weight, and she manages it with something that is not exactly forgiveness and not exactly acceptance, but is more like the cultivation of radical presence, the willingness to love what is there, the person who is actually present while holding the memory of the person who was there before. She does not demand that the Ice King be Simon in order to receive her patience. She extends herself across the discontinuity of what he has become and meets him where he is. This is one of the most quietly profound things Adventure Time does with the Simon-Marceline relationship. It models a way of loving across loss that is not about denial or acceptance in the simple senses, but about continuing to show up, continuing to be present, continuing to extend care even when the conditions for easy reciprocity are gone. Marceline invites the Ice King to play basketball. She tells Finn and Jake about Simon and Marcy so that they will understand why they should be kinder. She uses her own most precious possession to help Simon reach Betty's pass for the apology he needs to make. She loves him in both of his versions, and she does not require either of them to be the same as the other. There is a version of this that speaks directly to the experience of loving someone through illness, through addiction, through any process of becoming that moves them away from the person you knew. The show does not resolve this experience into a lesson or a self-help directive. It holds it in its full difficulty and says, this is what the people who stay through this are doing. It is not glamorous. It is not always satisfying. It requires a kind of love that extends past the point where love is easy, past the point where the other person can return what you are offering in the form you need it returned. And the people who can do this, who can love the present person while holding the memory of the former person, who can grieve without collapsing, who can show up without requiring anything back, are doing something that the show treats as genuinely remarkable. The crown was built to grant the deepest wish. Evergreen's deepest wish was to protect the world. Gunther's deepest wish was to be like the person he loved. Betty's deepest wish was to protect Simon. All three wishes were, at their core, oriented towards something outside the self, toward the world, toward an admired figure, toward the person they loved. All three wishes came at catastrophic cost. The crown grants what it finds in the deepest layer of the person, and what it consistently finds is love in one form or another. And love consistently costs everything when it is the truest thing a person carries. This is not an argument against love. It is a description of what love is when it is real, something that goes down further than self-interest, something that is willing to pay costs that cannot be calculated in advance, something that reaches even when reaching costs everything. Simon Petrikov bought a crown from a dock worker in Scandinavia because he was curious about old things. He put it on to make a woman laugh because he loved her. A child in a ruined world received a stuffed bear from a man who was losing himself because that man loved her. A woman traveled through time to an apocalyptic future because she loved a man she had watched become unrecognizable. 1,000 years of stories bloom from a single afternoon of playfulness, a single impulsive act of showing someone you love. The strange thing you found today, and everything that followed was real and terrible and beautiful, in the specific way that things are beautiful when they are genuinely true. In the end, what the philosophy of the Ice King amounts to is this: you can lose almost everything and something essential remains. You can be taken from yourself and something that was you will persist in the taking. The things you loved will be carried forward by other people when you cannot carry them yourself. The people who love you will keep reaching even when you cannot receive what they are offering. The cost of being a person who loves is enormous and ongoing and non-negotiable, and there is no version of being alive that escapes it. All of this is true, and all of it hurts, and all of it matters enormously. A blue man in an ice mountain calls his penguins the wrong name. Somewhere in the sound of that wrong name is a dinosaur's grief for a master who never saw him. Somewhere in that grief is a young woman who loved a scholar. Somewhere in that scholar is a child sitting alone in the ruins of the world. Somewhere in that child is 1,000 years of being loved imperfectly and losing what she loved and keeping going anyway. All of it is folded into the sound of one wrong name echoing through an ice castle. That is the Ice King. That is Simon Petrikov. That is what Adventure Time has been holding all this time, waiting for you to be ready to feel it. If you made it all the way here, take a moment with that. Let the weight of it settle into you in whatever way it needs to. Adventure Time is, at its core, a show about what survives, what persists in people and between people across loss and change and the long, strange passage of time. It asks that question with a crown and a penguin and a man with blue skin, and it answers it with everything. Drop a comment below right now. I want to know where you are watching this from, what time it is, what the world looks like outside your window. There is something I love about knowing this reaches people in different corners of the world at different hours of the night. And if this kind of deep, slow narrative unpacking is what you want more of in your life, the kind where we take something apart carefully to find out what it was made of, then hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means the next time I sit down to spend a few hours in a fictional world with you, you will already be there. There are so many more stories waiting. The land of Ooh is wide and old and full of things that feel, upon examination, like truths about the real world pressed into the shape of a cartoon. And we have all the time in the world to find them together. Rest well. And wherever you are watching from, good night. Script written for dozing off time, Adventure Time and beyond. Optimized for 11 labs. Voiceover generation appendix, the deeper layers, everything the show was doing all along. There is a particular experience that Adventure Time rewards in its most dedicated viewers, which is the experience of watching the show a second time, knowing what you know after watching it the first time. Most shows with significant plot twists reward rewatching in a simple way. You look for the clues you missed. You see the foreshadowing you could not have recognized. You feel clever for noticing things that were hidden in plain sight. Adventure Time does something more interesting than this. When you watch it again knowing Simon's story, the Ice King does not become merely legible in a new way. He becomes unbearably present in a way that the first watch could not access. Watch the early season episodes again, the ones where Ice King is purely a comedy villain, and listen to the way he talks. Not about his schemes, those are just silliness, the architecture of a cartoon antagonist plot. Listen to the way he talks about wanting company, about wanting someone to stay, about wanting to be chosen. He is not performing loneliness for effect, not playing it up as a character trait. He is stating something that is simply and completely true. He is a creature who needs connection and cannot have it, who keeps reaching in the only ways available to him, who has been doing this for 1,000 years with zero success and no indication that success is coming. In one early episode, he tries to force Finn and Jake to be his best friends. Not to capture them, not to use them for anything, just to have them agree to be his friends. He devises an elaborate scheme to make this happen. The scheme fails because all his schemes fail, because the crown has taken the social reasoning he would need to actually achieve what he wants, and replaced it with something that only knows how to reach through force. But the desire underneath the scheme is heartbreaking in its simplicity. He wants friends. He wants them badly enough to invest significant effort in getting them. He cannot understand why his methods do not work. He does not have the capacity to see that the methods are the problem. In another episode, the Ice King composes a sad song about being alone and sings it to his penguins, who listen with the patient attentiveness of creatures who cannot leave. It is played as comedy. It is also, knowing what you know, a 1,000-year-old man singing his loneliness to the only audience that will not run away from him, in a castle he has lived in alone for so long. That alone has become his baseline, his default, the texture of his ordinary existence. The penguins listen. The Ice King sings. The song echoes off ice walls and goes nowhere. There is a moment in a later episode when Finn, understanding Simon's backstory, begins to treat the Ice King with more gentleness than he used to. He starts inviting him to things, including him in small social events. Not because the Ice King has earned this inclusion, not because he has stopped being a problem, but because Finn has learned what understanding does to the way you treat people. He understands now why the Ice King is the way he is. He cannot fix it. He cannot reach Simon through the Ice King's madness. But he can extend small kindnesses toward a creature who has been extended very few. And this is presented, quietly and without fanfare, as the right response to understanding. Not a solution, not a cure, not a redemption narrative. Just a human being treating another human being with more care because he now knows there is more to care about. This is what the show is doing when it slowly builds Simon's history into the mythology of the Ice King. It is teaching you how to see the people around you differently. It is not saying that everyone who hurts others has a tragic backstory that explains and excuses the harm. It is saying that understanding changes the texture of your response, that the question, why, does not eliminate the harm, but it does change the shape of what you do with it. Finn does not stop stopping the Ice King's schemes. He just stops treating the Ice King as an abstraction, as a villain-shaped obstacle, as something that exists only in relation to the problems it causes. He treats him as someone with a history, which is what all people are. On the crown as philosophical object. Let us spend a moment with the crown itself, because it is one of the most carefully constructed magical objects in any animated mythology I can think of, and its construction carries philosophical implications that the show works through across years of storytelling. The crown was designed with one function: to grant its wearer's deepest wish. This is an elegant mechanism. It does not interpret, does not judge, does not impose an agenda. It simply reaches into the person, past the surface desires, past the conscious wants, past all the layers of performance and fear and social conditioning, and grants what it finds at the bottom. In theory, this makes it an instrument of perfect self-fulfillment. You get what you most truly want. What could be more just? The problem, which Evergreen did not anticipate and which the show spends considerable time exploring, is that the deepest wish is not always the wisest wish, or the most beneficial wish, or the most constructive wish. Gunther's deepest wish was to be like someone who did not value him. This wish, perfectly granted, turned him into a broken imitation of the thing he wanted to become, screaming the instruction most often directed at him by the person he idolized. The wish was granted with absolute fidelity and produced absolute disaster, because the deepest wish was itself the expression of a wound, rather than the expression of healthy desire. This is the crown's philosophical core. It reveals the relationship between what we want most and what we actually need. In most cases, as the crown's history across Adventure Time suggests, these are not the same. Gunther wanted to be Evergreen. What he actually needed was to be seen by Evergreen, valued by him, treated as a person rather than an instrument. The crown gave him the surface form of the wish without addressing the underlying need. It always does this. It always will. Farmworld Finn, in an alternate timeline where he wears the crown to save his family, undergoes the same transformation Simon did: the madness, the ice powers, the gradual dissolution of the self. His deepest wish in the moment of putting the crown on is to protect his family. But the crown does not give him the ability to protect his family. It gives him ice powers, which allows him to protect them in one specific way, and causes enormous collateral damage in other directions. The crown grants the mechanism without granting wisdom about the mechanism. It gives you the power and trusts you to figure out the rest, which is trust misplaced in almost every case. Betty's wish at the very end is to protect Simon. The crown grants it in the only way it can, by fusing her with GOLB, which creates an entity whose primary function is protecting Simon from further harm. It is a technically perfect grant. It is emotionally catastrophic. She asked for protection and received disappearance. The crown did exactly what it was asked. The crown always does exactly what it is asked. The problem is never the crown's fidelity. The problem is the gap between what we ask for and what we actually mean. This is a deeply human philosophical problem dressed in magical clothing. We want things all the time that, if granted exactly as we have formulated them, would produce outcomes we would not want. We want to win the argument, and what we mean is that we want to be understood. We want to be left alone, and what we mean is that we want to be left alone in a way that does not feel like abandonment. We want someone to come back, and what we mean is that we want things to be the way they were before, which is not the same thing as the person coming back, and never will be. The crown exposes this gap with brutal efficiency. Every person who wears it is revealed to themselves in the most challenging possible way. They discover what they most deeply want, and they discover it by receiving it in the form that makes its inadequacy inescapable. There is a question worth sitting with here. What would your crown show? If something reached past all the defenses you have built for yourself, past all the things you have decided you want, and all the narratives you have constructed about who you are and what you are trying to do, past all of that, down to the thing that is most truly there, what would it find? Is it a wish that would serve you well if granted? Or is it a wish that reveals a wound, a need that has been living in you unaddressed so long that it has become the organizing principle of everything else? Simon Petrikov's crown found, at the deepest layer of him, Gunther's wish to be like a person who never saw him. This is the tragedy of the crown. It did not destroy Simon because it found something bad in him. It destroyed Simon because it found something sad in him, something that was already there before the crown arrived, the record of a wound that 65 million years of history had encoded into the object before Simon ever touched it. The crown did not create the tragedy. The tragedy was already in the crown, waiting for the right person to put it on. On loneliness as a philosophical condition. The Ice King is lonely. This is the most basic and most important thing about him. Before the backstory, and before the philosophy, and before any of the deeper analysis. He is simply, profoundly, completely alone. And he has been alone for so long that aloneness has become the structure of his reality, rather than a temporary condition he is passing through. Loneliness has a philosophy. It is not just an emotion. It is a condition of consciousness that raises genuine questions about the nature of being a self in a world full of other selves. To be lonely is to be aware of yourself as separate from others in a way that feels unbridgeable. It is to experience your own interiority as a kind of prison. You are here, they are there, and the gap between cannot be fully crossed no matter what you do. You can communicate. You can touch. You can share experiences. But the fundamental fact of being a distinct consciousness, of experiencing the world from inside a particular perspective that no one else has access to, cannot be eliminated by any form of connection. The loneliness is structural. It is built into what it means to be a person. This does not mean that the loneliness is inevitable or that it cannot be addressed. It means that the addressing is an ongoing project rather than a solved problem. Relationships do not eliminate the gap. They bridge it, repeatedly and imperfectly, in ways that make the gap livable. The Ice King has spent 1,000 years trying to bridge a gap that his methods make it impossible to bridge. He reaches through force and capture, which adds locks to the door he is trying to open. He wants to not be alone and creates, through the act of trying to not be alone, the conditions that ensure he continues to be alone. Adventure Time draws a philosophical distinction, through the Ice King, between loneliness as a temporary state and isolation as a structural condition. Loneliness is what you feel when you are without connection. Isolation is what you inhabit when you have lost the capacity for the kind of connection that would address the loneliness. The Ice King is not just lonely in the moment. He is isolated in a deeper sense. The Crown has taken the social and emotional equipment he would need to build real relationships and replaced it with something that can only simulate the surface form of relationship seeking without achieving any of its substance. And this distinction matters because it suggests that the solution to loneliness is not just the presence of others. The Ice King has others around him constantly. The penguins, the princesses he kidnaps, Finn and Jake who keep showing up to stop his schemes. He is surrounded by other beings. He is still completely isolated. Presence does not produce connection. Connection requires something that the Ice King cannot generate in his current state. The willingness to be genuinely seen rather than to capture. The ability to receive another person rather than to acquire them. The capacity to be changed by relationship rather than to use it as a tool. Simon had this capacity. Simon was, before the Crown, someone who genuinely connected, who was known by Betty in the specific way that involves being known at your worst and not left, who was known by Marceline in the way that involves being trusted with a child's life, who was known by his academic community well enough that they could mock him for his specific peculiarities rather than dismissing him as merely generic. He had been genuinely in relationship, which is different from merely being surrounded by people. The Crown took this capacity from him by taking the self that possessed it. The Ice King reaches for what Simon reached for but cannot do what Simon did, because the doing requires a self that is coherent enough to maintain relationship across time, to be the same person in the next encounter that you were in the last, to build the accumulating trust that real connection requires. The Ice King cannot reliably maintain this continuity. He cannot be counted on. He cannot be trusted. And so whatever he reaches for cannot reach back in the way that would address what he is reaching for. This is the philosophical prison of the Ice King. It is not just that he is alone, it is that the thing that would allow him to not be alone, the capacity for genuine, mutual, trust-based connection, is exactly what the Crown has taken from him. He is reaching with the wrong hands. He is trying to solve the problem with the tool that created it. He is the Crown's most complete expression, a being of power and need who cannot use the power to address the need, who is trapped in the specific irony of having more ability than almost anyone in Ooh and being unable to deploy that ability in service of the only thing he actually wants. On memory and the construction of the self, Simon keeps records because he understands, at a level below conscious articulation, that the self is made of memory. Without memory, there is no narrative continuity, no through line connecting who you were to who you are to who you might become. Memory is not just storage. It is the mechanism by which you understand yourself as a particular person with a particular history, the infrastructure that makes it possible to say I and mean something consistent by it over time. When the Crown takes Simon's memory, it does not just remove facts, it removes the architecture of the self. The Ice King cannot say, I have been Simon Petrikov for 47 years and this is what that experience has taught me. He cannot locate himself in relation to his own history because the history is not accessible to him. He exists in an eternal present that has no depth behind it, a consciousness without the perspective that only memory can provide. This makes the VHS recordings extraordinary in a new way when you think about them from this angle. Simon is not just trying to document facts. He is trying to create an external memory, a record that will exist outside his deteriorating mind that might, if found, allow someone else to have access to the history he is losing. He is externalizing his selfhood into objects, trying to make his personal history survive the person who lived it. This is, in a deep sense, exactly what archaeologists and antiquarians do with the artifacts of dead civilizations. Simon is doing archaeology on himself while he can still be both the site and the excavator. There is an ancient philosophical tradition that locates personal identity in the continuity of memory. John Locke, writing in the 17th century, argued that what makes you the same person over time is precisely the fact that you remember being that person. That your consciousness of being the same self across time is what constitutes your identity as a self. On this view, a person who has lost all memory of their former self is not, in any meaningful philosophical sense, the same person they were before. The Ice King, on this account, is not Simon Petrikov. He is a different person who happens to occupy the same body. But other philosophers have pushed back on this, arguing that memory-based theories of personal identity are incomplete. You are not just the sum of what you remember. You are also the sum of what happened to you, whether or not you remember it, the set of experiences and relationships and encounters that shaped your current character and dispositions and ways of responding to the world, many of which you cannot explicitly recall. On this view, the Ice King is Simon Petrikov in all the ways that actually matter, even without the memories. Because the shape of what Simon was is still visible in the shape of what the Ice King is, even when the surface has been so thoroughly altered that the correspondence is hard to see. Adventure Time does not adjudicate this debate cleanly. It presents both versions of the question as live and irreducible, and it asks you to live in the uncertainty rather than resolving it into a more comfortable answer. Is Ice King Simon? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. In the ways that would matter most to Simon himself, the continuity of conscious experience, the ability to say, I remember being the person who loved Betty, a body, who found Marceline, who made the recordings. No. In the ways that matter most to Marceline, the presence of the same capacity for love, the same need for connection, the same fundamental warmth that Simon had? Possibly yes, in distorted form. The show seems to suggest that identity is less like a fixed thing and more like a river. It has continuity and direction and the same basic character across time, but its specific content is always changing, always in motion, never exactly the same in 2 moments. Simon and the Ice King are the same river, but the water that was Simon has long since passed out of the system, and the water that is now moving through the same channel is entirely different matter. The channel is the same, the water is not, and the question of which one constitutes the river is a question that depends on what you think rivers are. On the Mushroom War and the world that was... It is worth sitting with the Mushroom War for a moment, because Adventure Time uses it in a way that is philosophically interesting, quite apart from its function as backstory for Simon and Marceline. The show is set in a world that is, unmistakably, our world, or was our world, before the war ended it. The ruins of human civilization that Simon and Marceline wander through in Simon and Marcy are not a fantasy landscape. They are the ruins of American highways and strip malls and soup restaurants and parking structures and all the specific, recognizable infrastructure of contemporary life. The Mushroom War was our apocalypse. The land of Ooh grew up in the ruins of our present. This means that the Ice King is, in a specific and uncomfortable sense, a survivor of us. He is a man from our world who has been preserved into a future so distant from our present that the people living there cannot fully comprehend what the world he came from was like. He is a living bridge between the world that was and the world that is, and the bridge is damaged. He cannot give the people of Ooh access to the world he came from because the crown took his ability to communicate coherently about it. And so the only legacy of the human world that he carries forward is his loneliness and his obsessions and the specific, garbled echo of his former self that persists in the form of the Ice King. There is something philosophically poignant about this. The last human survivor of our civilization is a man who cannot remember that he was one. The final representative of everything humans built and wanted and loved is a creature who cannot explain what those things were. If you wanted to send a message from the human world to whatever comes after it, Simon Petrikov would not have been your first choice. But he is what time and circumstance left, and the message he carries, garbled, distorted, barely legible, is that there were people who loved each other, who found each other in the dark and tried to keep each other safe, who wrote letters to strangers they had not yet met because they believed in the value of reaching out. That the crown distorted this message does not make the message false. It just makes it harder to read. Adventure Time is, at its core, a post-apocalyptic story that refuses to be depressing. It takes the end of human civilization and finds, in its ruins, the seeds of something new. Strange, wonderful, improbable, but genuine. It argues, by the fact of the land of Ooh existing, that something survives even total catastrophe, that consciousness persists, that life reinvents itself, that the specific, irreplaceable texture of individual people and their loves and their reaches toward each other continues to exist even in a world that has been, in every practical sense, destroyed and rebuilt. Think for a moment about what Simon would have been carrying on those long walks through the ruins. He was an antiquarian. He was a man who had spent his entire professional life thinking about the relationship between objects and the civilizations that produced them, about what artifacts can tell us about the people who made them, about what survives and what does not, and why. He was trained, specifically and deliberately, to read the material residue of collapsed societies and reconstruct from it some sense of what had been present before. And now he was walking through the collapse of his own society, the one he had actually lived in, and trying to survive it with a crown on his head that was progressively disabling exactly the faculties he needed to make sense of what he was seeing. There is a specific cruelty in this. A man whose life's work was understanding ruins was made into one before the ruins were even finished cooling. The archaeologist became the artifact, the person who would have been most equipped to record and interpret and transmit the meaning of the old world to whatever came after was transformed, by the very act of surviving it, into something that could no longer perform that function. Whatever Simon Petrikov might have written about the Mushroom War and the civilization it destroyed, and he was exactly the kind of careful, precise, intellectually rigorous person who would have written something extraordinary about it, was never written. The Crown saw to that. The record he might have left does not exist. Instead, we have the Ice King muttering about princesses in a frozen mountain, and the show asks us to understand that this substitution is the specific, irreplaceable tragedy at its center. The land of Oo does not know what it lost when it lost Simon's clarity. It does not know because it cannot know, because the only person who could have told it was the one who lost the ability to do so. This is a condition that entire civilizations share with the Ice King. The things they cannot know are precisely the things that were not recorded, that were not preserved, that did not survive the transitions and catastrophes that separate us from our own past. History is not just what happened. It is what happened and was written down by someone who survived to write it and was in a position to write it, and understood that writing it mattered. The Ice King's silence about the world that was is a microcosm of every human silence about every lost world. The version of events that did not get recorded because the person who could have recorded it did not survive or lost the capacity or simply had no one to write it for. And still, the show insists something gets through. Not the precise historical record, not the clean transmission of facts and dates, and the specific texture of ordinary life in the 20th century. But something, the warmth gets through, the reaching gets through. The letters, however garbled their context, get through to someone who needed them. The song Simon sang to keep himself sane on a frozen highway in the ruins of the world eventually reaches Marceline, 1,000 years later, when she sings it back to him on a night when she needs something to hold. The content was lost. The care survived. This is not nothing. The show argues, without quite saying it out loud, that this is actually everything. Simon Petrikov is the show's most complete expression of this argument. He is the end of the old world surviving into the new one. He is the persistence that the show keeps talking about, made literal in a single blue man who lives in a mountain of ice and calls his penguins by the wrong name and cannot remember who he was. He is there, he persists, and somewhere in the persisting is the thing that made him worth persisting in the first place. Not the facts, not the record, just the shape of a love that was real enough to leave its outline in everything the Crown could not take away, on what we owe the people we love when we are losing ourselves. There is a specific ethical dimension to Simon's story that is worth examining carefully, because it is one the show handles with more sophistication than most explorations of this territory. Simon, during the period between putting on the crown and becoming fully the Ice King, makes a series of decisions about what he owes the people he loves, under conditions where his own deterioration makes those decisions increasingly difficult. He continues to care for Marceline even as the Crown takes more of him, making calculated assessments about when his presence is a net benefit and when it might become a net harm. He eventually decides to leave, not because he wants to, but because he has decided that her safety takes priority over his own desire for her company. This is a philosophically interesting choice because it involves him acting as an agent on behalf of her interests, even when his own interests point in the opposite direction. He wants to stay, he loves her. He is frightened of being alone in the ruins, but he also recognizes, with the specific, painful clarity of someone who can still recognize things, but knows that clarity is running out, that his presence is becoming dangerous, that the thing he is becoming might hurt her in ways he cannot control or predict or prevent. He prioritizes her well-being over his own. He makes a sacrifice that costs him something real. This decision is complicated by the fact that he cannot fully know whether it was the right one. He leaves, and she survives, and she grows up and becomes Marceline the Vampire Queen and lives for 1,000 years. Would she have survived if he had stayed? Maybe. Would the 1,000 years have been better or worse if Simon had remained present, even in his deteriorating state? This is genuinely unknowable. He acted on his best assessment of a situation that was beyond any clean assessment, and he made the choice that seemed most likely to protect her, and whether it was right is something that cannot be definitively answered. But the ethical dimension is not just about consequences. Simon's decision to leave is also an act of epistemic humility, an acknowledgement that he cannot trust himself anymore, that the version of him that might make decisions while the crown is on is not a version he can vouch for. He withdraws not just to protect her from possible harm, but because he no longer has reliable access to his own intentions, and a person who cannot trust their own intentions cannot reliably exercise judgment about situations that depend on that trust. He steps back because he understands that the capacity to step back is one of the last things he will lose, and that using it while he still has it is the most he can do. This is a form of moral seriousness that the show treats with great respect. Simon does not reach for rationalizations. He does not tell himself that he can manage the crown better than the crown will let him. He does not prioritize the desire to stay, which is real and strong, over the assessment that staying is wrong. He is honest with himself, and he acts on that honesty, and it costs him everything. This is what the show means, or part of what it means, when it presents Simon as fundamentally good. Not that he never made mistakes or never caused harm, but that when faced with a genuinely hard moral choice, he saw it clearly and did what it required. The show also asks, through Betty's arc, what we owe people we love who are changing in ways we cannot stop. Betty's answer is everything. She gives everything, her present, her future, her sanity, her physical existence. She cannot stop giving because stopping would mean accepting that Simon is gone, and she cannot accept that. This is presented by the show not as the right answer, but as an answer, a real and understandable response to loss that the show takes seriously without endorsing uncritically. Betty's sacrifice saves Simon. It also destroys Betty. The show holds both of these facts without suggesting that one cancels out the other. What do we owe people we love when they are becoming someone we cannot save? The show suggests we owe them our presence, our witness, our willingness to extend care across the discontinuity of who they used to be and who they have become. We do not owe them our self-destruction. We do not owe them the sacrifice of our own personhood in service of restoring theirs. Betty loses herself in the project of restoring Simon, and the show is sad about this. Genuinely sad, not judgmental, not blaming, because it recognizes that this kind of loss is easy to fall into when you love someone, and because it believes that Betty was worth more than what she became in the name of saving him. Marceline's model is different from Betty's. Marceline stays, keeps reaching, keeps showing up, but she does not lose herself in the process. She grieves, and she adjusts, and she finds ways to be with both versions of the person she lost, the Simon in her memory and the Ice King in her present. She loves the Ice King without requiring him to be Simon, without making her care conditional on his restoration, and she persists as herself across 1,000 years of carrying him forward. The show suggests, gently and without pronouncing a verdict, that Marceline's way is more sustainable. That love which requires the beloved to be a specific version of themselves in order to be freely given is love with conditions that time will eventually make impossible. That love which can extend across transformation, which can recognize the continuity of a person through change rather than demanding the reversal of change, is the kind that can last, that can outlast the most devastating losses, that can carry something true forward even when the form of the thing has been altered beyond easy recognition. The final teaching. And so we return to where we began. A blue man in an ice mountain calling his penguins by the wrong name. The wrong name is Gunter. It comes from a dinosaur who died 65 million years ago, whose deepest wish was to be like someone who never saw him. This wish was preserved in a crown that passed through countless hands across the millennia, transforming each wearer into a distorted image of a long-dead ice elemental, until it reached a 20th century antiquarian named Simon Petrikov, who bought it for its potential historical significance and put it on to make someone laugh. 65 million years of a wound, carried forward in an object, discharged into the life of a man who was trying to create a moment of joy. There is no moral lesson that covers this cleanly. There is no practical takeaway that accounts for the scale of the tragedy or the specific absurdity of its mechanism. There is just, this is how things happen. Harm does not come only from malice. It comes also from good intentions that did not account for what they could not see, from objects that carry histories their owners cannot know, from the specific, terrible compounding of circumstance that takes a good impulse and turns it into a catastrophe across time. We spend a great deal of energy in our lives trying to construct situations where we can guarantee outcomes, where our good intentions will reliably produce good results, where the things we reach for will not turn against us, where the things we love will not change into something we cannot recognize. Simon Petrikov lived this way before the crown. He was careful and precise and thorough and intellectually honest, and he loved well and he planned ahead and he wrote things down. And still the crown found him, and still the world ended. And still the 65-million-year-old wish, embedded in a piece of headwear, turned a moment of playfulness into the longest, loneliest story in the entire land of Oo. The show is not saying that care and intention do not matter. Simon's care clearly mattered. It mattered to Marceline in ways that shaped her across a millennium. It mattered to Betty in ways that moved her to sacrifice everything. It mattered to the Ice King himself in the buried, inarticulate way that things matter to someone who cannot access the reasons they matter. Care matters. But the show is also saying that care is not sufficient protection against a universe that operates on scales we cannot fully perceive or account for. That goodness does not immunize you against loss. That the most loving people in the world can find themselves transformed by forces they could not have anticipated. That the most careful plans can be undone by a history you did not know you were inheriting. This is a harder thing to sit with than most of what gets called a life lesson. It does not close cleanly. It does not offer a strategy. What it offers instead is something more like company. The recognition that the gap between intention and outcome, between the person you are trying to be and the person circumstances make you, between the love you feel and your ability to express it, this gap is not a personal failing. It is the condition. It is what it is like to be a finite creature in an ancient world that has been carrying its wounds forward long before you arrived and will carry them long after you are gone. And alongside the tragedy, this is also how love persists. Simon Petrikov's love for Betty survived 1,000 years of its bearer not knowing it existed. His love for Marceline shaped 1,000 years of her life. His letters found her across a millennium. Betty's love for him moved through time and sacrifice to give him back what he had lost. And Marceline, for all those years, kept the stuffed bear and held the memory and loved two versions of the same person without requiring them to be the same. The stuffed bear is called Hambo. Simon found it in the ruins and gave it to a 7-year-old girl he had no obligation to protect because she needed something to hold and he had something to give. The bear outlasted Simon's memory of giving it. It outlasted the civilization that produced it. It outlasted 1,000 years of the world inventing itself again from scratch. It was still there when Marceline needed it. This is a small thing and a large thing at the same time. The bear is just a bear. What the bear represents is not just a bear. And this is, maybe, the most honest thing Adventure Time ever says about love. That it leaves traces in the objects that pass between people. That a stuffed toy in a child's arms is not just a toy. That a letter written to a stranger is not just a letter. That a song hummed on a frozen highway to keep the dark from winning is not just a song. These things accumulate. They compound across time. They arrive at their destinations along routes that the person who sent them could not have predicted. And when they arrive, they mean more than they were meant to mean, because everything that happened between the sending and the receiving has made them into something beyond themselves. The gift Simon gave Marceline was a bear. The gift that reached her, 1,000 years later, in every possible way that mattered, was proof that someone had seen her in the ruins and decided she was worth the effort of staying alive for. Love does not solve the tragedy. It does not undo the losses or reverse the transformations or return the world to what it was before the crown touched Simon's head. But it persists alongside the tragedy in the spaces the tragedy leaves, carrying what it can forward in the forms available to it. This is not a consolation. It is just the truth of what love is when it is genuinely true. Not something that prevents loss, but something that continues in the presence of it. The Ice King calls his penguins Gunter, and does not know why. Somewhere in the not knowing is everything this show has been trying to tell you. Not the answer. There is not a clean answer, but the question, held openly, without resolution, for as long as it needs to be held. That is the philosophy of the Ice King. That is why it matters. And that is why, 1,000 years from now, if anything carries the weight of what we built and loved and lost, I hope it sounds a little like Marceline singing Simon's letters back at him in an empty apartment, while a man who does not know his own name listens with mild and pleasant attention to the most important song he has ever heard. Rest with that for a moment. Let it sit. You do not need to resolve it tonight. You do not need to find the clean edge of it or make it mean one single final thing. Some ideas are worth holding, the way you hold something fragile in two hands. Not gripping, not letting go. Just keeping it safe for a while in the warm quiet before sleep finds you. The Ice King is in his mountain. The penguins are asleep around him. The snow is falling in perfect, indifferent silence on the land of Oo, and on the ruins below it, and on the long, impossible road that brought a man named Simon Petrikov from a world that no longer exists to this frozen, peaceful, bluely lit moment at the end of everything he used to be. He is not unhappy, exactly. That is something. That is not nothing. Close your eyes. You have carried enough for tonight. If this is where you've landed, at the very end of this, somewhere in the deep part of the night, thank you for being here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is, what the night looks like where you are, and if you're not subscribed yet, do that now. New videos whenever this world has something worth sitting with. Good night.